The keys felt heavy in my hand as I stood before what should have been our dream house, the house that David and I had spent 3 years planning. Every detail had been carefully chosen, the exposed wooden beams that lent a rustic charm, the wraparound porch where we once dreamed of growing old together. Now, this house belonged to Amber, his 23-year-old mistress, transferred for less than the price of a cup of coffee. My name is Rebecca Mitchell, and at 35, I never expected to be starting over. Yet here I was, watching my husband of 12 years pack his bags while sporting the smug expression of a man who believed he had finally won. "You can't do this," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "We built this house together." David barely glanced up from his packing. "Actually, I built it," he countered coolly. "My name's on all the paperwork. Remember? You were too busy with your law practice to deal with the tedious details, as you called them." I knew he was right about that part. I had trusted him completely to oversee the construction while I concentrated on building my career as a real estate attorney. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on me. "So, you just gave it to her for $1?" I asked, watching his reaction carefully. His smile widened, as if he were proud of his audacity. "It's a perfectly legal transaction, Becca. You should know that better than anyone. $1 is valid consideration for a property transfer. The deed's already recorded. There's nothing you can do about it." I recalled the document I had discovered just hours earlier, hidden amidst a stack of construction paperwork. David had been so overconfident, he believed he was clever, but he had been reckless, neglecting to read every detail. "You're right," I said softly, "the deed is recorded on every single page." Something in my tone made him pause and look up, his confidence wavering ever so slightly. "What's that supposed to mean?" he asked. "Nothing," I replied, turning toward the door. "I hope you and Amber will be very happy here. Though, you might want to read the fine print before you get too comfortable." "Fine print?" he called after me, but I was already walking away, leaving him to puzzle over my words. I drove to my office with my mind racing back to the moment everything had changed, 2 weeks ago. I had been working late at my law firm when a colleague stopped by my office, looking uneasy. "Rebecca," she said hesitantly in the doorway, "I think there's something you should see." She handed me a property transfer document. The deed to our dream house had been transferred from David to Amber Collins for $1. The date on it was 3 days earlier. I sat there, staring at it, feeling as if the floor had dropped out from under me. But the initial shock soon gave way to determination. After all, I was a real estate attorney. If David believed he could outmaneuver me in my own field, he was about to learn a painful lesson. For the next 2 days, I pored over every document related to the house's construction. David had insisted on handling all the paperwork, claiming it would be simpler if everything was in his name, since he was managing the build. I had agreed, trusting him completely. Yet buried in those papers, I discovered a clause that changed everything. The deed contained a special provision, a standard clause in custom builds in our area. It stated that if the property was sold for less than its market value within the first 5 years, it would trigger an automatic review by the county assessor's office. But this wasn't just any review. The clause specified that in such cases, the property would be reassessed at current market value. Any difference between the sale price and the market value would be subject to an immediate tax assessment payable by the seller. Our house was worth $2.8 million. David had sold it for $1. The tax bill would be astronomical, and it would fall entirely on him. The best part was that the clause was buried in the deed restrictions, which transferred with the property. There was no way to undo it without my signature releasing that restriction. I smiled to myself as I recalled the look on David's face when I casually mentioned the fine print. He would figure it out soon enough, probably when the county assessor's office contacted him about the pending tax assessment. My phone buzzed with a text from David. "What did you do?" I ignored it, focusing instead on another document I had discovered. It was a bank statement showing transfers from our joint account to a separate account in David's name. He had been gradually moving money, preparing for his exit. But he had made one crucial mistake. He had used our joint account to pay for the house's construction. Every penny spent on building that house could be traced back to our marital assets. In our state, that meant he could not hide half its value. Another text arrived. "Answer me, Rebecca." What fine print! I set my phone aside and pulled up the county assessor's website. There, just as I expected, was a notice of review triggered by the recent sale. David would be receiving official notification any moment now. My phone started ringing. David's name flashed on the screen. I let it go to voicemail, thinking, let him sweat for a while. I spent the rest of the afternoon preparing documents: a claim for division of marital assets, a petition for an emergency injunction to prevent any further property transfers, and a detailed accounting of every penny spent on the house's construction. By the time I left the office, I had 7 missed calls from David and a dozen increasingly frantic texts. The last one read, "You knew about this. You knew this would happen." Of course I knew. I was a real estate attorney who specialized in property transfers and tax law. Did he really think I wouldn't find a way to protect myself? I drove home to our apartment, the one I had insisted on keeping even after the house was finished, much to David's annoyance. He had wanted to sell it immediately, but something had held me back. Perhaps some part of me had sensed what was coming. As I parked, I saw David's car in the visitor spot. He was waiting by the entrance, pacing back and forth. His earlier smugness had been replaced by barely contained panic. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" he demanded as I approached. "Look at the tax bill, it's more than I make in 5 years." I keyed in the entry code, ignoring his words. "That's unfortunate," I said calmly. "You have to help me fix this." He followed me inside. "Please, Rebecca, you can release the deed restriction." "I'll lose everything." I turned to face him, taking in the desperation in his eyes. The same man I had loved for 12 years, now reduced to pleading for help after betraying me in every possible way. "You already lost everything," I said quietly. "You lost it the moment you decided to give our dream house to your girlfriend. The tax bill is just a consequence of your choices." He threatened, "I'll contest it. I'll say I didn't know about the clause." I laughed softly. "Go ahead," I replied. "You signed the deed. You're a businessman, David. Everyone expects you to understand the documents you sign. Tell a judge you transferred a $2.8 million property for $1 without reading the deed restrictions. I'm sure that will go over well." The color drained from his face as the reality of his situation sank in. "What do you want?" he repeated, desperation lacing his voice. "I don't want anything from you," I replied evenly. "You made your choice, now you get to live with it." I unlocked the door to my apartment and stepped inside, leaving him standing in the hallway. Through the door, I could hear him call out, "What about Amber? She can't afford the property taxes either." I answered coolly, "Then I guess she'll have to sell." "Hope she gets more than $1 for it," I added, closing the door on his protests. Leaning against the door, my heart pounded with the realization that the first phase of my plan was in motion. David had just discovered the tax implications of his impulsive decision, but he had no idea what was coming next. Tomorrow, he would be served with my petition for division of marital assets. The day after, he would learn about the emergency injunction to prevent any further property transfers. By the end of the week, he would realize that his attempt to hide our joint funds was about to backfire spectacularly. My phone buzzed again with another text from David. "We can work this out, please, I made a mistake." I set my phone to silent and poured myself a glass of wine. David was right about one thing: he had made a mistake. In fact, he had made several mistakes. But his biggest error was underestimating me. I sat down at my desk and spread out the stack of documents, every bank statement, every construction receipt, every transfer from our joint account. Together, they told a story of betrayal, yes, but also of carelessness. David had been so focused on his affair with Amber that he had grown sloppy with the details. And as any good attorney knows, details are everything. The next morning, I arrived at my office early, finding 3 manila envelopes already waiting on my desk, the serving papers for David, ready to be delivered. I checked my phone again, 5 more missed calls and a string of increasingly desperate texts from him. A message from the county assessor soon arrived: the tax bill is $980,000. Another text: please help me fix this. Amber's freaking out, she can't afford the property taxes. We can work something out on your price. I set my phone aside and focused on my computer screen. The county records showed that the deed transfer to Amber had been officially recorded. Perfect, now she was legally responsible for the property taxes going forward, while David was on the hook for the transfer tax bill. Not long after, my assistant knocked on my door. "Rebecca, your 9 a.m. meeting is here." I straightened my jacket and sent him in. Marcus Chin, the forensic accountant I had hired, walked in carrying a thick folder. "You were right," he said without preamble. "The money trail is clear. Your husband didn't just use our joint funds for the house, he's been systematically moving assets for months." He spread a series of documents across my desk: bank statements, transfer records, investment accounts. It was clear that David had been planning this for longer than I had realized. The good news, Marcus continued, is that he's terrible at covering his tracks. Every transaction is documented. He used your joint account as a pass-through, probably thinking that would make it harder to trace. Instead, it gives us a perfect record. I smiled grimly. "How much in total diverted assets?" I asked. "Just over $3.2 million, not including the house," Marcus replied. The number hit me like a physical blow: all those years of building our life together, and he had been planning to take it all. My phone buzzed again with another text from David: "The bank is threatening to freeze my accounts." "What did you do?" I calmly responded in my mind, knowing that what I had done was file a request for an emergency asset freeze as part of my divorce petition. Given the evidence of his financial maneuvering, the judge had granted it immediately. The timing, it seemed, was working in our favor. Marcus gathered his papers as he explained, "Most of these transfers happened after you started dating Amber. We can argue this was premeditated fraud." I thanked Marcus and walked him out, feeling a cold satisfaction mixed with sorrow for what our life had become. When I returned to my office, a new email from the county assessor's office was waiting. They had completed their review of the property transfer, and the official tax bill would be issued that very day. Soon after, my phone rang again. This time, it was Amber. "Miss Mitchell, I need to talk to you about the house," she stammered. "You mean your house?" I asked, keeping my tone professional. "The one you bought for $1, I didn't know," she said quickly. "About the tax thing, David never told me. I can't afford the property taxes, and the bank won't give me a loan because I have no equity in the property." I finished for her, "Since you only paid $1 for it, please," her voice cracked as she spoke. "I don't know what to do. David says his accounts are frozen, and I don't have that kind of money." I leaned back in my chair and considered the young woman on the other end of the line. She was barely older than my youngest sister. "Sell it," I finally said. "That's your best option." The property taxes are due in 30 days. If you sell now, you can use the proceeds to pay them and walk away with something. And let's be honest, David's anger is not your problem anymore. He used you as a pawn in his game, and it backfired. There was a long pause before she spoke again. What if I try to take the house back? She asked softly. That's why he put it in my name. I don't want the house, I replied. I want what's fair and right. Now you're caught in the middle of something that's about to get very messy. Sell the house, pay the taxes, and move on with your life. After hanging up, I sat there and reflected on how drastically things had changed in just 24 hours. David's carefully orchestrated plans were unraveling, and he was about to learn just how thoroughly he had miscalculated. The following days passed in a blur of legal proceedings. David hired an attorney, one of the best in the city, but even they couldn't dispute the paper trail he had left behind. Every transfer, every account, every attempt to hide our marital assets was documented with such precision that it left no room for doubt. The tax bill came out exactly as calculated, $980,000, payable immediately as a result of the transfer tax clause. David's attorney tried to argue that the deed restriction was unconscionable, but the judge was unmoved. The clause was standard in our area, and David had signed the deed willingly. A week after everything began, I received another call from Amber. I'm selling the house, she said. I have a buyer willing to pay market value. I wanted you to know that's a smart decision. I replied coolly, David's furious. She continued, he says I'm betraying him, but I owe him loyalty after everything he did for me. She laughed bitterly, as if positioning herself as a victim in a game in which she was merely a pawn. I felt an unexpected surge of sympathy for her. You don't owe him anything, Amber, I said gently. He used you to try to hurt me, and he didn't care what happened to you in the process. After she hung up, I pulled up the latest bank records on my computer. Marcus had sent over David's latest attempt to hide our assets, and it left a clear trail, a trail that would ensure everything was divided fairly in the divorce. 2 weeks later, the house was sold for $2.9 million. Amber used the proceeds to pay the property taxes and walked away with enough money to start fresh somewhere else. I heard she eventually moved back to her hometown in Oregon. Meanwhile, David was facing the full consequences of his actions. The tax bill had wiped out most of his liquid assets, and the divorce proceedings were exposing the full extent of his financial manipulations. His reputation in the business community was in tatters, and he was left to face the ruin he had created. One evening, as I sat in my apartment reviewing the settlement documents, my phone buzzed with a text from David, "You've destroyed everything I built." I thought about responding, about pointing out that we had built it together, and that he was the one who had chosen to throw it all away. Instead, I set my phone aside and looked out at the city lights. The dream house was gone, sold to a lovely family with 3 kids who would truly appreciate it. The life I had planned with David was over, and yet something new was taking shape, a future built on the foundation of my own resilience. My phone buzzed again with a text from David. I never thought you'd fight back like this. That was his ultimate mistake. He had spent so many years seeing me as the trusting wife, the one who let him handle all the details, and he had forgotten who I really was. He had forgotten that I understood property law better than he ever would, that I knew how to protect myself when it mattered most. In the final divorce settlement, everything was divided equally, just as the law required. David's attempts to hide our money had only strengthened my position, forcing him to be transparent about every account and every transfer. 6 months later, I sat in my new office, newly made partner at my firm, with a spectacular view of the city. The sense of peace I felt was something I had not experienced in a long time. The betrayal still stung sometimes, but it no longer defined me. My phone buzzed with a text from my sister, "Saw David at a restaurant yesterday." He looked terrible. You okay? I smiled as I typed my reply, I'm free. I'm free from the weight of betrayal, free from the need to prove anything to anyone. David had tried to take everything from me, but in the end, he had only succeeded in showing me my own strength. The dream house was gone, but I was still standing, and that, I realized, was worth more than any property deed. As I sat back and reflected on the whirlwind of events, I began to trace the moments that had led me here. I remembered the early days when David and I were young and full of hope. We had met at a charity event, and his charm had swept me off my feet. Back then, I believed that our dreams would take us to the highest peaks of success and happiness. We had talked for hours about the future, envisioning a life where every detail mattered, from the architecture of our home to the way we would laugh together on lazy Sunday afternoons. The house was not just a structure, it was the physical embodiment of our shared dreams, a symbol of our future together. In those early years, I was fiercely dedicated to my career. I had sacrificed many personal moments to climb the ladder in the competitive world of law. David, ever supportive, had encouraged me, even as he handled the more mundane aspects of our joint life. When we decided to build our home, it seemed natural to split responsibilities. He would manage the construction, while I concentrated on my cases and building a reputation as a trusted attorney. That decision, made in the excitement of young love, had seemed perfectly logical at the time. But as the years went by, I began to see cracks in the facade of our partnership. David's interest in the finer details of our life together had waned, and he had become increasingly preoccupied with other pursuits. The turning point came when I noticed subtle changes, a missed call here, a hushed conversation there. At first, I dismissed my concerns as stress from the long hours at work, but gradually, the signs became impossible to ignore. David started spending more time away from home, and I learned, through whispers in the office corridors and overheard phone calls, that he had found someone new. It was a betrayal that cut deeper than I ever expected. The woman, Amber, seemed so young and full of life, a stark contrast to the man I thought I knew. And yet, behind David's confident demeanor lay a calculated plan, a plan that he had executed with the precision of someone who believed himself untouchable. When I first discovered the deed transfer document, I was numb. The paper felt cold in my hand, a stark reminder that everything I had believed in was crumbling. Yet, beneath that numbness, a fierce determination began to grow. I refused to be made a victim in a game that David had orchestrated. With every document I reviewed, every receipt and bank statement I analyzed, I uncovered layer upon layer of deceit. I realized that while David had planned to escape with everything he could, he had overlooked one crucial detail, the very laws that I had studied and practiced for years. The legal battles that followed were grueling. Each day brought a new challenge, court hearings, consultations with experts, and the constant pressure of deadlines. I worked tirelessly, often staying late into the night to ensure that every document was in perfect order. My colleagues at the firm watched in awe as I transformed personal heartbreak into a formidable professional challenge. They saw the determination in my eyes and the meticulous care with which I prepared every argument. In a way, the legal proceedings became a cathartic process, a way to reclaim my life piece by piece. Throughout this ordeal, I found unexpected allies. Marcus, the forensic accountant, became not just a professional collaborator but also a source of moral support. He meticulously combed through financial records, uncovering every misstep David had made. His reports were detailed and irrefutable, and each new piece of evidence felt like a small victory against the tide of betrayal that threatened to overwhelm me. His calm assurance and unwavering professionalism gave me strength on days when the burden seemed too heavy to bear. Even as the legal machinery turned relentlessly, I couldn't help but feel a pang of sorrow for what we had lost. The house, which had once been a beacon of our shared dreams, had become a monument to our failure to communicate, to trust, and to stand together in the face of adversity. Every room, every window, held memories of laughter and whispered promises, now replaced by cold legalese and harsh financial realities. Yet, in that sorrow, I also found a strange sense of liberation. The very structure that symbolized our dreams was now a reminder that those dreams could be remade, that life, even in its most painful moments, offered new beginnings. As the weeks passed, the legal proceedings reached a fever pitch. David's attorney, once so confident in his ability to argue against the deed restrictions, now found himself scrambling to counter the mountain of evidence I had gathered. The judge, stern and unyielding, listened carefully to the arguments on both sides. In the end, the outcome was clear: justice would be served. The tax bill, the division of assets, and the transfer of property were all confirmed in favor of a fair and equitable settlement. David's carefully constructed web of deceit unraveled completely, and he was left to face the full consequences of his actions. In the aftermath, I began to rebuild, not just my finances and my career, but my very identity. I immersed myself in my work, determined to rise above the betrayal. Late evenings in my new office became moments of introspection as I looked out over the city lights and contemplated the future. The pain of the past slowly gave way to a cautious optimism, a belief that I was capable of forging a life defined not by the mistakes of others, but by my own strength and resilience. There were moments when I almost missed the lessons hidden in the ruins of our former life. I remembered the times when David and I would walk hand in hand, dreaming about the future. I recalled the excitement of choosing every detail for our home, the joy of planning a life that seemed so full of promise. And now, as I sat in the quiet of my new office, I realized that those dreams were not lost, they had merely transformed into something new. The house was gone, but the memories, both sweet and bitter, would forever be a part of me. They had taught me that trust, once broken, could be rebuilt into a foundation for a stronger, more independent future. Even now, when my phone buzzes with messages from the past or news of David's further misfortunes, I feel a calm certainty in my heart. I am no longer the naive woman who believed that love and trust could overcome all obstacles. I am a survivor, a skilled attorney, and most importantly, a person who has learned to value herself above all else. The legal battles, the emotional turmoil, and the relentless pursuit of justice have all contributed to a transformation that I never expected. In the end, the ordeal with the dream house, the tax bills, and the betrayal became the crucible in which my true self was forged. Looking back, I realize that life has a peculiar way of teaching us lessons in the most unexpected ways. David's miscalculation, his underestimation of my abilities, set in motion events that not only dismantled his ill-conceived plans but also paved the way for my personal rebirth. The experience reshaped my understanding of trust, partnership, and the importance of safeguarding one's interests. I now know that every detail matters, whether it is in the drafting of a legal document or in the careful cultivation of a relationship. In the quiet moments after a long day at work, I often think of the long, winding road that brought me here. I remember the sleepless nights, the endless hours poring over documents, and the moment of triumph when the judge ruled in my favor. I recall the bittersweet taste of victory, a victory that came at the cost of a relationship I once cherished. And yet, as I stand here today, in my new office with a stunning view of the city, I feel an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Gratitude for the strength I discovered within myself, for the lessons learned in the face of betrayal, and for the opportunity to begin anew. The legal settlement not only restored a sense of fairness but also sent a clear message, that no one, no matter how clever they may think they are, can outsmart the truth. Every misdeed, every financial maneuver, had been exposed. And while David's reputation lay in ruins, mine grew stronger with each passing day. I embraced the challenges that lay ahead, determined to build a future defined by independence, honesty, and a deep understanding of my own worth. Now, when I look out at the city from my office window, I see a future filled with endless possibilities. I no longer live in the shadow of betrayal. Instead, I move forward with the confidence of someone who has weathered the storm and emerged even stronger. the memories of the dream house, once a symbol of lost promises, have been transformed into stepping stones on my journey toward a brighter, more secure future. Every detail of that painful chapter, the heavy keys in my hand, the whispered conversations, the legal documents that unraveled a web of deceit, remains etched in my memory. Yet, they no longer bind me. They serve as reminders of the strength I possess, the lessons I learned, and the new life I have built from the ashes of the old one. I am free now, not free for responsibility or consequence, but free to live my life on my own terms, to embrace each new day with the wisdom of past experiences, and to never again allow betrayal to define me. In the end, the saga of our dream house and the shattered illusions it represented became the catalyst for my transformation. It taught me that while some people will always choose to act in their own self-interest, I must always act in mine. I learned that the smallest details, the fine print in a deed, the hidden clauses in a contract, can hold the power to change lives. And I learned that sometimes, the greatest victories come not from winning a battle, but from reclaiming one's dignity and self-respect. As I sit here now, I understand that true strength lies not in the absence of pain, but in the ability to rise above it. The past may be filled with memories of what could have been, but the future is mine to shape. I have reclaimed not only my professional reputation but also the confidence and self-worth that had been overshadowed by betrayal. And as I continue forward, I carry with me the knowledge that I am capable of overcoming any obstacle, no matter how daunting. The story of that once beautiful dream house, a structure built on hope and shared dreams, has now become a powerful lesson in resilience. I have transformed heartbreak into empowerment, and in doing so, I have discovered that the true value of a home is not measured in dollars or deeds, but in the strength and spirit of the people who call it their own. Today, I am that person, a woman reborn from the ruins of a broken promise, standing tall and determined to build a future defined solely by my own dreams and values. And so, even as I remember the past with a bittersweet mix of sorrow and resolve, I step confidently into each new day. I know that while the house is gone, I have built something far more enduring, a life founded on the principles of truth, justice, and the unwavering belief in my own worth. I have learned that betrayal can only take so much before it forces us to see clearly what is truly important. I have learned that every setback, every moment of despair, can be the spark that ignites the fire of a new beginning. In the end, my journey is not just about a lost home or a failed marriage, it is about reclaiming my power, reshaping my destiny, and proving to myself that I am capable of rising above even the darkest betrayals. I am Rebecca Mitchell, a real estate attorney, a fighter, and above all, a woman who has emerged stronger from the ashes of her past. The road ahead may still hold challenges, but I face it with the quiet confidence of someone who knows that true success is measured not in the dreams we build with others, but in the ones we build for ourselves.